Listen to your breath. Welcome. We're going to begin chapter 2 of Relatively Painless. Vent. They huddled over the vent, the Grunman children, not for heat today, but to listen. They crouched on the floor of their parents' bedroom directly above the kitchen and tried to make out the words. The tenor, clear, terrified them. Much of what was said below came muffled, distorted by the hidden ducts. They strained against the echo and ring to find sense in the syllables. Their mother's anger rose to peak volume and then tensed to a feline growl. Then their father, his rage a clenched threat, gripped an apology between feral jaws. They had never heard this before, this fury in their home, so they huddled. They listened. Daniel, the younger of the two, said, "Do you think?" Lindsay cut him off with a look. 9 years old, she had already learned her mother's warning glare. Daniel's eyes widened at her, an expression of urgency. She put a finger to her lips, telling him that if he absolutely must speak, he should do it softly. He whispered, "Do you think we're not going?" They were both already dressed for the outdoors, for the cool spring day, for a promised visit to the carnival that had set up in the wide parking lot of the A&P in Saratoga Springs. They had started with the casual mention of the flyer they'd seen on the bulletin board at school that escalated to carefully timed imaginings of what it would be like as offhanded dinner conversation. They had slowly, deliberately led their parents to come to their own decision that it would be a fun activity for the whole family, perhaps over the weekend. Yes, maybe on Sunday, late morning when it would be less crowded. So many families would be at church, they might nearly have the whole place to themselves. Daniel mostly loved the rides. He loved the feeling of motion and danger, although he never screamed and shrieked like the other children. He would feel a grin coming on as he reached the front of the queue, and it would stay with him as he walked the shaky plank to the roller coaster car or the Ferris wheel carriage to the tilt-a-whirl seat like a vinyl booth diner bench in a tin bubble. He would nod at the young grown-ups whose job it was to lower the safety bars in front of him, and then as the ride started, he would shift into a mindset of analytical intellect. There's no actual danger, he would remind himself in that sublingual way of inner soothing. The place would be shut down if people got hurt. He would sit as others screamed around him, feeling the shift and pull of the great centrifuge, the rise and peak of the squeaking swing cage, the time bomb ticking of the upward incline, and the weightless drop of that first plummeting coast. He turned inward to find the muscle groups reacting to the unexpected banking left, the sudden lurching halt, the pressing shift of momentum. He loved each of these as though every moment was its own micro adventure, and he prided himself on his ability to enjoy the sensation without the screeching panic that took so many people as they rose and fell, as they rotated and revolved. As he stepped away from each, again the grin would take him, the sheer joy of it all, the anticipation of the next thrill that he might examine from just enough psychic distance that it could not touch him. Lindsay had very little interest in most of the rides, save the tilt-a-whirl, which she said reminded her of what she always wanted dancing to feel like. She loved the mazes and the fun houses. From the scare at every turn spooky palace to the labyrinth of mirrors, if she could hand someone tickets to walk through a doorway, she would pay the price to enter the Warren. Once at the small amusement park at Katie Ross Lake, Daniel had stood outside watching her navigate the House of Glass. As others about her, kids and adults alike, took delight in bumping up against transparent dead ends and struggling with the low-level anxiety of claustrophobic disorientation, Lindsay walked the maze head down, pace so steady she might as well have been coming home from school, textbooks under her arm. Once she started down a wrong corridor, stopped before reaching the end, retraced her steps, and resumed her walk to the exit. "You didn't look like you were having any fun at all," he said to her. "It's not as hard as it looks," she said. Then, after a brief pause, "I think most people pretend it's hard so they feel like it's worth the price." She headed immediately for a funhouse with the slanty floors and the glow-in-the-dark perspective illusions, and he tagged after his older sister. The rides, too. People scream like it's scary. She shrugged then. I like the mazes, puzzles, you know? He didn't, but he said, anyway. Listening to the fight, shouting and rumbling up through the branching, bending ductwork, Daniel and Lindsay could sense one another's fear. Their parents argued from time to time, but that took the form of disagreements usually about what the kids should or shouldn't eat at what time of day, or whether they were flush enough as a family to go to a movie opening weekend, or if they would have to wait until the next paycheck came in. Whoever lost such a dispute would put up his or her hands in defeat and say, okay. And then after a moment, but I get points. The points supposedly could be cashed in on a future disagreement. They never were. Sometimes, if Dad got his feelings hurt, he might take cruel verbal jabs at his wife over dinner, caustic jokes with an antiseptic sting. When Mom carried resentment over something, she took on an overly cheerful tone and chattered on about innocuous inanities as though she might paint over her displeasure in bright hues of desperate yellow. The very worst of arguments consisted of a few curt words, and then an hour of silence underscored by the measured drone of National Public Radio's All Things Considered. Today, though, the conflict felt violent to the children, listening, eyes wide, as though that might help them hear the details hidden in the strident cadence and tone of the dark, tunnel-muffled confrontation. Then silence broke up through the shaft. Lindsay and Daniel looked at one another's eyes, their senses reaching out toward the staircase. They both knew, in the way that young siblings know a thing without thinking it odd to share a thought, that if they heard footsteps on the stairs, they would have to pretend to be playing, not listening. No footsteps came. The fourth step did not creak under the weight of an adult. The silence lasted what seemed a very long time. Then loud footsteps crossed the kitchen floor and a door slammed. Lindsay moved to the window and looked out. She said, "It's Dad. He didn't take the car. Going for a walk." "Yeah." Hands in his pockets. He looks pissed. They crept down the stairs together. They went one at a time over the fourth step so it would not creak, and they sat on those bottom steps below the turn that allowed them to see their mother's back. She stood at the sink washing dishes with a vigor breakfast dishes could not possibly require. Lindsay said, "You should say something to her." "Why me?" "Because you're the funny one. Make her laugh or comfort her or cheer her up." He hesitated. So she added, "Maybe if you get her talking, we can find out what's going on." Daniel nodded. He stepped up to the kitchen door and breathed, hoping his mother would hear him. A shift in her breathing suggested she had, a sharp sniff that ended a tense muttering sniffle. He said, "Hey, Mom?" She said, "What?" But her focus stayed on the scrubbing of a clean cereal bowl. He wanted to say, "What were you guys fighting about?" He wanted to say, "Lindsay and I don't know what's going on and we're scared." He wanted to say, "Are you okay?" He did not say any of those things, though he paused as each of them ran through his head. He thought to turn toward happier thoughts. He said, "Do you think there'll be a tilt-a-whirl at the carnival?" His mother turned off the water and set the bowl aside. She stood for a half second, maybe a full second, holding the edge of the sink, and then she turned to face him. He thought for sure this was what a person's eyes looked like from the outside when they saw red. Her words came out crisp and quiet and terrifyingly controlled. "You have got to be the most insensitive, self-involved human being I have ever known." He heard her rage, her disappointment. He heard her words. "No, for Lindsay, it's the only ride she likes." He didn't know why that was what he had asked rather than whatever it was that his mother would have preferred he ask. He was almost certain that none of the questions he really wanted to ask was what she would have wanted anyway. Uh-huh. She continued to study him with those blood-stained eyes, lip quivering between a sneer and a snarl until he backed away, imagining apologies he dared not voice. His calves touched the bottom stair and he sat on the cool hardwood of the tread, realizing that his sister had vanished. His mother returned to the kitchen, not to the sink where he could see her, but to the table out of his frame of vision. He pictured her sitting there, furious, wondering how she had raised such an unfeeling monster. He considered finding Lindsay and yelling at her for making him do that, but he knew it had not been her fault. He had said the wrong thing. He had made it all worse. He wanted someone to comfort him, to cheer him up. He could not imagine who might do that or how. An hour later, their father returned. There was some conversation in the kitchen that the kids could not hear. They did not try. Then Dad yelled, "You guys about ready to go? We're still going?" That was the plan, wasn't it? They climbed into the car, grown-ups in front, kids in back. Dad drove, making the occasional joke. Mom read road signs aloud, turned the radio on for a bit, and then turned it off to talk about what she'd just heard. Behind them, seen only by Daniel, Lindsay looked down at her knees, eyebrows pushed together toward one another as though a complex puzzle troubled her deeply. Daniel watched her for a bit. Then he closed his eyes and listened to his mother's soothing chatter. He felt his weight move with the shifts in momentum as the Grunmans hurtled toward the flash and chaos of the Dreamland Carnival, toward the rickety gear contraptions maintained by gap-toothed mechanics and operated by acne-scarred adolescents, toward the waiting rides where Daniel would wheel and fly and fall, and he would feel safe. Thank you. As always, this story will be archived at the website. And of course, we would love to see you next week for Chapter 3, Silent. In the meantime, listen